I should have known something was wrong the moment I finished that painting. It had started like any other, a blank canvas and an idle evening in my studio. The soft hum of classical music filled the air, and the scent of turpentine lingered like an old friend. My brush moved almost instinctively, the strokes emerging as though guided by invisible hands. But what appeared wasn't what I intended. The painting showed a wooded clearing, bathed in silver moonlight. In the center, a small cabin slumped under the weight of time and neglect. Its windows, gaping black holes, seemed to stare at me, daring me to look closer. A single lantern hung from the porch, casting an eerie, flickering glow that turned the shadows into dancers. There was no reason for this scene to emerge from my mind. I didn't recognize the location, yet it felt familiar. Too familiar. As I stepped back to examine the work, a cold shiver ran down my spine. I'd painted dozens of landscapes before, but none like this. This one seemed alive, almost as if it were waiting for something or someone. That night, I couldn't sleep. The painting remained propped against the easel, its dark hues somehow more vivid in the pale moonlight spilling through my window. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the trees outside, felt amplified, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The next morning, I couldn't resist the urge to study the painting again. Something was wrong with it, I was sure. As the sun rose, its light seemed to drain the colors from the canvas, leaving the shadows sharper, more defined. And then I saw it, a faint figure, barely discernible, standing near the cabin's door. I could swear it hadn't been there before. My pulse quickened. I told myself it was a trick of the light, or perhaps I'd been too tired to notice the detail when I painted it. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't the first time my art had shown me things I couldn't explain. By noon, the news broke. A local woman had gone missing. Claire Donovan, a teacher from the nearby elementary school. Her car had been found abandoned by the highway, her belongings untouched. The police suspected she'd gone hiking and lost her way in the dense woods surrounding our town. My hands trembled as I turned off the radio. I looked at the painting again, my breath catching in my throat. That cabin, it could have been anywhere in the forest, but something told me it wasn't just anywhere. It was her somewhere. For hours, I wrestled with what to do. How could I explain to anyone that I'd painted a scene that seemed connected to a missing woman, that I'd somehow known, on some subconscious level, about her disappearance before it even happened? They'd think I was insane, or worse, involved. As night fell, I found myself back in the studio, staring at the painting like it held the answers to every question I didn't want to ask. The following day, I took the painting to the sheriff's office. Not the painting itself, that would have been impossible to explain. Instead, I brought a photograph of it, folded carefully into my coat pocket. Sheriff Blake eyed me suspiciously as I laid it on his desk. His office was cramped, cluttered with maps and old case files. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and mildew. "You're saying you painted this?" he asked, his weathered face unreadable. I nodded, my palms slick with sweat. "Yes, 2 nights ago." He leaned closer, studying the photograph. "And you think this has something to do with Claire Donovan?" The doubt in his voice was evident, and I couldn't blame him. "I don't know," I admitted. "But that cabin, does it look familiar to you?" Blake tapped the edge of the photograph, his brow furrowing. "There are plenty of cabins out in those woods. Most of them haven't been used in years. This one could be anywhere." He sat back, folding his arms across his chest. "What made you think to bring this to me?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. I've painted things before. Things that later turned out to be real. I don't know how to explain it." Blake's skeptical gaze lingered on me for a long moment before he sighed. "Look, I don't know what this is, but if you're trying to help, I appreciate it. I'll pass this along to the search teams, see if anyone recognizes it." I left the station feeling both relieved and unnerved. The sheriff hadn't outright dismissed me, but his doubt had been clear. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just made a terrible mistake. That night, the dreams began. I was in the woods, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and pine. The trees loomed overhead, their skeletal branches clawing at the starless sky. I stumbled through the underbrush, drawn toward a faint, flickering light in the distance. The cabin appeared exactly as I'd painted it. Its lantern swayed gently in an unseen breeze, casting long, jagged shadows. As I approached, the door creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness inside. A voice, soft and pleading, echoed from within. "Help me!" I woke in a cold sweat, my heart hammering in my chest. My studio door was ajar, and when I went to check the painting, I found that the figure by the door was now gone. My knees buckled, and I sank to the floor, staring at the empty doorway in the painting. Whatever I'd seen, it wasn't over. It was just beginning. The dreams wouldn't stop. Each night, I returned to that same forest, my breath clouding in the icy air as I followed the faint glow of the cabin's lantern. The voice was always there, faint but persistent, calling from the shadows within. Yet, no matter how close I got, I never found her. Each time, I'd wake drenched in sweat, the sense of her desperation haunting me long after the dream faded. The painting changed again. I first noticed it one morning as the sun rose, its light slanting through the blinds of my studio. The cabin was still there, but now the forest around it seemed denser, the trees pressing in as though trying to consume it. The shadows had deepened, taking on the faint shapes of figures, indistinct and hollow. And in the distance, a faint streak of light split the sky, like a crack in the world. I tried to focus on anything else, but the painting pulled at me, its presence growing heavier each day. The smell of oil paint seemed stronger, almost overpowering, and the colors on the canvas appeared to shift when I wasn't looking. It wasn't just a painting anymore. It was a doorway, and something on the other side was trying to get through. Then came the whispers. At first, they were faint, like a distant radio just out of tune. I'd hear them in the quiet moments, while brushing my teeth, while washing dishes. Soft murmurs that seemed to rise and fall without rhythm. At night, they were louder, scratching at the edges of my consciousness, making sleep an impossible luxury. The voices weren't hostile, but they weren't kind either. They were searching, questioning, demanding something I couldn't understand. It felt as if the painting had reached inside me, tangled its threads with mine, and now it was unraveling me piece by piece. I stopped going to the sheriff's office. What could I tell him? That my painting was speaking to me? That the visions of a cabin I'd never seen were consuming my life? Blake's patience only stretched so far, and I was already teetering on the edge of his skepticism. But the visions refused to let me go. By the end of the week, I couldn't paint anything else. Every time I tried, my hand would move on its own, dragging my brush across the canvas to create twisted, unrecognizable shapes. No matter how I fought it, my mind always returned to the cabin, the woods, and that haunting flicker of lantern light. The breaking point came on a stormy evening. I'd barricaded myself in my studio, desperate to stop the whispers, the dreams, the visions. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled like a living thing. I turned the painting to face the wall, hoping to drown its pull in darkness. That's when I heard her. "Please, find me." The voice was no longer in my dreams. It was in the room with me, soft but piercing, slicing through the roar of the storm. My breath hitched as I turned to face the painting. The canvas now glowed faintly, the lantern's light shimmering as if alive. I knew then that I couldn't escape. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to stop until I followed it to the end. The woods were darker than I'd imagined. Armed with only a flashlight and a growing sense of dread, I ventured into the forest under the pale glow of a full moon. The air was thick with moisture, the ground soft and spongy beneath my boots. Every step seemed to echo, the sounds swallowed by the oppressive silence. The path was indistinct, but I didn't need a map. The image from my painting burned in my mind, guiding me as surely as if it were a trail of breadcrumbs. The lantern's glow, so vivid in my dreams, now seemed to pulse faintly in the distance, a beacon drawing me deeper into the unknown. The deeper I went, the stranger the forest became. The trees twisted unnaturally, their branches forming shapes that almost resembled human figures. The air grew colder, and a faint mist began to creep along the ground, curling around my ankles like ghostly fingers. And then I saw it. The cabin stood exactly as I'd painted it, slouched beneath the weight of time. Its lantern swayed gently in an unseen breeze, casting long, jagged shadows that seemed to stretch toward me. The windows were dark, and the door hung ajar, revealing nothing but inky blackness within. My pulse thundered in my ears as I stepped closer. The whispers had returned, louder now, swirling around me like a storm. They weren't coming from the cabin, but from the trees, the air, the earth itself. Help her! Find the veil. The words were fractured, overlapping, but one thing was clear. I wasn't alone. I reached the porch, my hand trembling as I pushed the door open. The wood groaned under my touch, and the whispers fell silent. Inside, the air was cold and heavy, carrying the faint scent of decay. The room was empty, save for a single object in the center, a large, cracked mirror. Its surface shimmered faintly, rippling like water. As I approached, my reflection seemed to shift and waver, distorting until it wasn't my face staring back but hers. Claire Donovan. She was trapped, her hands pressed against the other side of the glass, her eyes wide with fear. Her lips moved, forming a single word. Help! My breath caught as the whispers surged again, louder and more urgent. The mirror pulsed with a soft, otherworldly light, and I knew, somehow, that this was the veil they spoke of. If I crossed it, there was no guarantee I'd return, but I couldn't leave her there, trapped in the void, a prisoner of whatever force had ensnared her. I reached out, my fingertips brushing the cold, rippling glass. And then the world shattered. The sensation of crossing the veil was indescribable. It wasn't like walking through water or mist, but more like falling through layers of time and memory. I felt my breath hitch as the mirror's surface pulled me inward, its cold tendril enveloping me entirely. For a moment, there was nothing. No light, no sound, only a bone-deep stillness that pressed against my chest. Then, the world around me reformed. I stood in the same cabin, yet it was entirely different. The air shimmered faintly, and the walls seemed alive, their wooden planks twisting and groaning as if they were breathing. A dim gray light filled the space, though its source was unclear. The lantern still hung from the porch, but its glow was muted, casting shadows that danced with a life of their own. Claire was there. She stood in the center of the room, her form translucent, like an image projected onto smoke. Her hair hung in tangled strands around her pale face, and her eyes, wide and haunted, locked onto mine. "You came," she whispered, her voice carrying both relief and fear. "I didn't think anyone would come." "I saw you," I replied, my words trembling in the heavy air. "Through the painting. I don't know how, but I saw you." She nodded, her gaze flicking to the walls as they creaked ominously. "This place, it's not just a cabin. It's a trap. It lures people, holds them here. I don't know how long I've been. I can't leave." The realization settled over me like a cold fog. The cabin wasn't just a structure. It was alive, a place between places, feeding off those it ensnared. "You can leave," I said, though the words felt hollow. "I'll help you. We'll go back together." She shook her head, panic flickering in her expression. "It won't let me go. It won't let us go." Before I could respond, the air around us shifted. The walls groaned louder, the shadows lengthening and twisting into grotesque forms. They crawled across the floor and walls, coiling like snakes, their movements deliberate and menacing. The whispers returned, louder and more chaotic than ever. They filled the space, overlapping in a cacophony of fragmented words and sounds. "You shouldn't have come," Claire said, her voice trembling. "Now it knows you're here." "What knows?" I asked, my heart pounding as the shadows crept closer. She didn't answer. Instead, her form flickered, her edges blurring as though she were being pulled away. Her eyes widened with terror, and she reached out to me. "Don't let it take you," she pleaded. "Find the light. That's the only way out." The shadows surged, their formless mass growing larger, darker. I grabbed Claire's hand, or at least I tried to. My fingers passed through hers like mist, and she dissolved before my eyes, her form scattering into the shadows. Panic gripped me as the room began to twist. The walls folded inward, the floor rippling like water. The shadows closed in, their whispering voices turning into a deafening roar. "Find the light," her voice came out faintly, a fragile thread of hope amidst the chaos. I turned toward the lantern. Its glow, faint as it was, seemed untouched by the surrounding darkness. Taking a shaky step forward, I reached for it. The shadows lashed out, their cold tendrils brushing against my skin, but I pushed forward, my focus fixed on the flickering flame. When my fingers wrapped around the lantern's handle, a searing warmth coursed through me. The light flared, bright and blinding, driving the shadows back with an anguished wail. The cabin shuddered violently, its walls splitting and dissolving as the light grew stronger. And then I was falling again, tumbling through the same suffocating void that had brought me here. When I awoke, I was outside, lying on the forest floor. The dawn's light pierced through the trees, bathing the woods in a soft, golden glow. The air was still and quiet, the oppressive weight of the cabin gone. The painting was waiting for me at home. It was different now. The cabin was gone, replaced by an empty clearing under a clear, starry sky. The lantern's light remained, but it was faint, distant, a reminder of what I'd left behind. I couldn't explain what had happened. The whispers, the shadows, the veil. It was all beyond comprehension. But Claire was gone, and the sense of wrongness that had haunted me since I first painted the cabin had lifted. Still, the experience had changed me. My vision, once a source of wonder, was now a constant reminder of the unknown. The world around me shimmered faintly at the edges, like a thin curtain separating reality from something darker. And sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, I'd see her. Just a flicker, a shadow in the corner of my eye. A reminder that the veil was still there, and that some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed.